All right, so get it. President Trump just signed an executive order, and it could totally reshape the entire federal workforce.
Wow.
We're talking like major downsizing hiring, freezes the whole 9 yards.
Seriously?
And to lead this charge,
Okay.
none other than Elon Musk.
Oh, wow.
You know, the guy behind Tesla and SpaceX.
Yeah, I know Elon Musk.
So it's a pretty big deal.
It's a bold move for sure. This isn't just like trimming the budget or anything. It's
Yeah.
like a whole shift in how the government views its role.
Yeah, its size, its reach.
Exactly.
And today's deep dive is going to be all about this.
Okay.
We're looking at a Fox News article.
Okay.
It's titled, Trump Signs Order Instructing DOGE to Massively Cut Federal Workforce.
DOGE.
Yeah, and it lays out all the details of this shakeup.
So this is a pretty politically charged story, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we need to be really careful about how this news is being framed.
Yeah.
And think about, like, what it might tell us about the motivations behind it.
For sure. And the Fox News article definitely has a certain angle. But we're going to break it all down.
Okay.
See what's really going on and what it could mean for you.
Sounds good. Let's start with DOGE then.
DOGE?
Yeah, the Department of Government Efficiency.
Okay.
They're the ones tasked with wielding the budget-cutting axe here.
Right.
And their goal is to slash $2 trillion from the federal budget.
$2 trillion. That's an insane amount of money.
It's not chump change.
What does that even look like?
Right.
In terms of actual government programs and services?
Well, that's where things get interesting.
Okay.
This requires some serious prioritization.
Yeah.
And one of the first targets outlined in this executive order is USAID.
USAID. So the agency that handles foreign aid.
Exactly.
What's the thinking there?
Well, the Fox News article highlights some examples of what they're calling questionable USAID spending.
Okay.
And they specifically mention this Iraqi version of Sesame Street.
Sesame Street in Iraq.
Yeah. Think about it.
Okay.
In the midst of these huge budget cuts, this example is sure to raise some eyebrows.
Yeah.
It really plays into this narrative about wasteful spending.
Right. So it's not just about cutting costs.
Right.
It's also about sending a message.
Exactly. What the administration values.
Okay. Clever, but also kind of cynical, don't you think?
Maybe a little bit. But how does Elon Musk fit into all of this?
Yeah. He's the one heading up DOGE.
He is.
And, you know, he's not exactly your typical government appointee.
That's for sure. He's more known for launching rockets and electric cars.
Yeah. Not navigating the bureaucratic maze of D.C.
The article quotes him saying that the American people voted for government reform and that the Trump administration is going to deliver.
That sounds like a promise.
It does.
But what does that reform actually look like?
Well, the executive order lays out some pretty concrete actions, including a pretty drastic hiring freeze.
Okay.
Agencies can only hire one new employee for every 4 that leave.
Wow.
And on top of that, they're being told to prepare for large-scale reductions in force.
Reductions in force. Isn't that basically just layoffs?
Pretty much. It's pretty intense. For many federal workers, this is completely new.
Right.
I mean, they've traditionally enjoyed a level of job security that you just don't see in the private sector.
The article even talks about federal workers experiencing like panic over all this uncertainty.
Yeah. Can you blame them?
Not at all. For a lot of these people, this is uncharted territory.
Totally. And it's important to remember that these aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right.
We're talking about people's lives.
Right, of course. So is everyone in the federal government facing the chopping block here?
Not quite. The order exempts certain areas, like law enforcement, national security, and immigration enforcement.
So even amidst these massive cuts, those areas are untouchable.
It makes you think about priorities, right?
It does.
Yeah.
What does it tell us about the administration's focus when these specific areas are protected?
Exactly. It seems like they're doubling down on what they see as like core functions.
While scaling back on things they consider less essential.
Like USAID.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that $2 trillion question.
Yeah.
How are they going to actually achieve these massive cuts?
Well, we know layoffs are on the table.
Right.
But what else? Did the U.S. Office of Personnel Management try to soften the blow with buyouts? They did. The article mentions that they offered buyouts to over 2 million federal employees.
Wow.
To try and incentivize them to leave their jobs.
Okay.
But here's where things get even more complicated.
Okay.
A federal judge has temporarily blocked the buyout program.
Really?
Yeah, because of legal challenges from union groups.
So there's pushback already.
Absolutely. This is a reminder that we're not just dealing with numbers and policies.
Yeah.
We're talking about a system
Yeah.
with lots of moving parts,
Yeah.
legal hurdles, and people fighting for their rights.
So you're saying this whole downsizing thing might not go as smoothly as the Trump administration hoped.
Exactly. This legal challenge raises questions about the government's authority to even implement these changes.
Wow.
And it could throw a wrench into their plans.
This is getting really interesting. It's like a game of chess,
It is.
with each move having ripple effects across the whole board.
And we're just at the beginning.
Right.
What we're seeing here is a fundamental shift
Uh-huh.
in how the government operates,
Yeah.
with potentially long-lasting consequences.
And this is all happening during a global pandemic
Right.
and a rapidly changing technological landscape.
It's like watching a slow-motion earthquake unfold,
Yeah.
reshaping the foundations of our government.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
I mean, we've got a lot to unpack still,
We do.
from the impact on federal workers to the role of technology in all of this.
Let's delve deeper into those aspects after a quick break.
Okay.
We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into this story.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about this massive government shakeup. And I have to say, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I mean, $2 trillion in cuts legal battles, Elon Musk leading the charge.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to process.
It is, but let's try to break it down
Okay.
and see what it could actually mean for you, the listener.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about numbers and politics.
Right.
It's about how the government serves its citizens.
Okay. That makes sense.
Mm.
So let's talk about the human side of this story.
Yeah.
The article mentioned federal workers experiencing panic.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that a little?
Imagine you've dedicated your career to public service.
Okay.
Maybe you've been with the government for decades.
Yeah.
And suddenly your job security is gone.
Right.
That's the reality for a lot of federal workers right now.
That's got to be incredibly stressful.
It is. And it's not just about the potential for job losses.
Right.
It's the uncertainty, the anxiety
Yeah.
of not knowing what the future holds.
Right.
Many of these folks have families to support, mortgages to pay retirement plans in place.
Right. The article mentioned that around 65,000 federal employees have already taken buyouts.
That's right.
So some people are choosing to leave rather than wait and see what happens.
Yeah. But remember, the buyout program has been temporarily halted
All right.
by a federal judge
Yeah.
due to legal challenges.
So the government might not have the final say in all of this.
Not necessarily. This legal battle could drag on for a while,
Okay.
and the outcome is uncertain.
So it's not just about cutting costs then.
No.
It's also about navigating this complex web of legal and political obstacles.
Exactly. And it's also about considering the potential consequences of these actions.
Okay.
Like, if the government downsizes too drastically,
Yeah.
will it be able to effectively deliver essential services?
That's a good question.
Uh-huh.
What are some of the potential downsides of this whole downsizing thing?
Well, one concern is that it could lead to longer wait times
Okay.
for things like passport applications,
Mhm.
visa processing,
Yeah.
even tax refunds.
So basically more bureaucracy, even with a smaller government.
It's a possibility, and there's also the potential for reduced oversight
Okay.
and regulation.
In what areas?
Things like environmental protection
Okay.
or consumer safety.
That's a bit worrying.
Yeah,
It sounds like this whole downsizing effort could backfire.
it could if it's not done carefully.
Right. So this executive order is forcing us to think about some fundamental questions
It is.
about the role of government in our lives.
Absolutely. And it's also forcing us to confront the reality of our national debt.
Okay.
The U.S. has been running budget deficits for years.
Right.
And the debt has grown to an unprecedented level.
So is this downsizing effort simply a way to address that debt problem?
It's certainly being presented that way, but it's important to remember there are different schools of thought on how to address the debt.
Okay.
Some argue for spending cuts,
Yeah.
others for tax increases, and others for a combination of both.
And where does the Trump administration fall on this?
They seem to be firmly in the camp of spending cuts,
Okay.
at least based on this executive order.
But wouldn't raising taxes also be a way to reduce the debt?
It could be, but it's a politically sensitive issue.
Okay.
Raising taxes is often unpopular.
Yeah. So it seems like there's a bit of a political calculus at play here as well.
There always is. And it's important to be aware of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the human impact,
Yes.
the legal challenges, and the economic context of this downsizing effort.
Yeah.
But what about the role of technology in all of this?
Right.
The article didn't really touch on that.
It didn't.
But I'm curious how automation and artificial intelligence might factor in.
You're right. That's a key piece of the puzzle that the article didn't explore.
Yeah.
Automation and AI have the potential to completely revolutionize the way government works,
Okay.
potentially making it more efficient and less reliant on a large workforce.
So is technology going to make this whole downsizing thing even more dramatic?
It's possible. As technology advances,
Yeah.
we could see more government tasks being automated, which could lead to further reductions in the federal workforce.
But isn't that a good thing? I mean, if technology can help us streamline things and make things run more smoothly, shouldn't we embrace it?
In theory, yes. But it's not that simple.
Okay.
There are a lot of potential downsides to consider.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, widespread automation could lead to significant job losses,
Okay.
not just in the government,
Right.
but across the entire economy.
So it's not just federal workers who should be concerned about this.
Not at all. This is a much broader issue
Yeah.
that has the potential to reshape the entire job market.
Right.
And we need to start having serious conversations
Yeah.
about how we prepare for a future where automation plays a much larger role.
That's a sobering thought. It feels like we're on the cusp of some major societal shifts.
We are, and it's hard to predict how it's all going to play out.
Okay, so back to this executive order.
Yeah.
And the man at the helm of DOGE.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that Elon Musk is not your typical government appointee.
He's not.
Can you expand on that a bit?
Well, for one thing, he's not a career politician.
Okay.
He comes from the world of technology and innovation,
Right.
where speed and disruption are valued.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to see him applying that mindset to the government.
It almost feels like he's been brought in to shake things up,
It does.
to disrupt the status quo.
That's certainly the impression one gets
Right.
from his public statements.
Yeah.
He's talked about fulfilling the American people's desire for government reform.
Right. But can someone from the private sector with a background in Silicon Valley really understand the complexities of government?
That's the big question, isn't it?
I mean, government's not a tech company.
Right.
There are different rules,
Right.
different values, different ways of doing things.
Absolutely. But maybe that's exactly what the Trump administration wanted.
Oh, okay.
They wanted someone who would come in with a fresh perspective.
It's definitely a bold move.
It is.
But is it the right move?
Only time will tell. But it's an experiment worth watching.
Okay.
Musk's track record suggests he's not afraid of taking risks and challenging conventional wisdom.
But will that translate to success in the world of government?
It's a completely different beast.
It is, but it's a beast that's ripe for disruption. So are you saying that Elon Musk could actually pull this off?
Yeah.
That he could really transform the government?
I'm not saying it's guaranteed,
Okay.
but it's definitely possible.
Right.
And either way, the impact of his leadership at DOGE will be significant.
This whole DOGE saga is getting more interesting by the minute.
It is.
We've got Elon Musk trying to disrupt the government, a massive downsizing effort underway,
Yep.
legal battles brewing,
Right.
and the potential for technology to reshape everything.
It's a lot.
What else could possibly happen?
But that's the beauty of it all.
Okay.
It's unpredictable.
Right. But let's bring this back to our listener for a second. What are the key takeaways here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the government is in a state of flux. We're seeing a shift in priorities,
Yeah.
a push for downsizing,
Uh-huh.
and a growing role for technology.
And what does that mean for everyday Americans?
It means that the way the government interacts with its citizens is likely to change
Okay.
in the coming years.
Oh, so.
We could see a reduction in services,
Okay.
longer wait times,
Uh-huh.
and a greater reliance on technology.
That's a pretty significant shift.
It is. Anything else our listeners should be keeping in mind?
Yeah, what else?
I think it's important to remember that this is an ongoing story.
Okay.
The legal battles are still playing out.
Right.
The long-term consequences of these changes are unclear,
Uh-huh.
and the role of technology is still evolving.
So you're saying this is just the beginning?
Exactly. We're at a pivotal moment in history,
Wow.
and the decisions being made today will have ripple effects for generations to come.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to digest.
It is.
But I feel like I have a much better understanding of what's at stake now.
That's the goal.
Okay.
We want you, the listener, to be informed and engaged.
Right.
This is your government,
Yeah.
And it's important that you understand how it works.
Yeah.
And how the decisions being made might impact your life.
So what should our listener be doing with all of this information?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed, to keep learning, and to engage in thoughtful conversations about the future of our government.
And to remember that this is not just a political issue.
Right.
It's a human issue.
Exactly.
Real people's lives are being affected by these decisions.
Absolutely. And it's our responsibility as citizens to make sure that those voices are heard.
Okay.
And that the government serves the best interests of all Americans.
Well said. Now let's shift gears slightly.
Okay.
And talk about the article itself.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the Fox News piece definitely has a particular angle.
It does.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. The article focuses heavily on the potential for waste and inefficiency in the government.
Okay.
Particularly in regards to USA.
And you mentioned the example of the Iraqi Sesame Street.
I did.
That seemed like a very deliberate choice on their part.
It was. By highlighting that example,
Yeah.
the article plays into a narrative that foreign aid is frivolous and wasteful.
Oh, so they're trying to shape public opinion on this issue.
Absolutely. And it's important to be aware of that. When you're reading any news source, every media outlet has a particular perspective.
Yeah.
And it's our job as consumers of information to critically analyze what we're reading and watching.
So we shouldn't just take the Fox News article at face value.
Not necessarily. It's important to consider other perspectives.
Okay.
And to look for evidence that supports or contradicts the claims being made.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
So what are some other perspectives on this issue?
Well, there are many people who believe that foreign aid is essential for promoting global stability and prosperity. They argue that it helps to alleviate poverty, improve health outcomes, and promote democracy and human rights.
So it's not just about throwing money at problems.
It's not. There's a strategic element to it.
Right. And it's important to remember that foreign aid isn't just about charity.
Right.
It's also about advancing U.S. interests abroad.
Exactly. So it's a complex issue.
It is.
With a lot of different viewpoints.
Okay. So we've talked about the human impact.
Yes.
The legal challenges, the economic context,
right,
the role of technology, and the media's portrayal of this issue.
Yeah.
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. Is there anything else you think our listeners should be thinking about?
Yeah. What else?
I think one of the biggest unanswered questions is how this will impact the government's ability to attract and retain top talent.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
If the government is seen as an unstable place to work, it could have a negative impact on the quality of its workforce.
Exactly. And that could have a ripple effect on the government's ability to function effectively.
So it's not just about cutting costs.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that the government can still work with a smaller workforce.
That's right. And it's a challenge that will require careful planning and execution.
Well, it seems like we've reached a natural stopping point for part 2 of this deep dive.
I agree. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But there's still much more to explore.
There is. We'll pick up this conversation in part 3.
Okay.
Where we'll delve deeper into the implications of this government shakeup and what it could mean for the future of our nation.
Stay tuned because this story is far from over.
So we've been talking about President Trump's executive order to downsize the federal workforce.
Right.
And it's clear that this story has a lot of layers.
It does.
We've discussed the potential impacts on federal workers, the legal challenges that are emerging, the role of technology in all of this.
Yes.
And even how the media is portraying this whole narrative.
We've covered a lot. And you've done a great job connecting all of those threads.
Thanks.
So let's try to zoom out for a moment.
Okay.
And think about the larger context.
Okay.
What does this executive order actually tell us about the current political climate and where the country might be heading?
So give us the bigger picture.
Well, this push for smaller government aligns with a specific ideology that's been gaining traction for decades now.
Right.
It's rooted in this belief that the private sector is inherently more efficient than the public sector.
Okay.
And that the government's role in the economy should be minimal.
So it's about shrinking the government's role, not just its size.
Exactly. And that has implications beyond just budget cuts.
That's good. Like what?
It could lead to a shift in how the government approaches things like regulation, social welfare programs, even its role in addressing issues like climate change or income inequality.
So this executive order could be a sign of a more fundamental shift.
It could be.
In how we view the relationship between the government and its citizens.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that these shifts don't happen overnight.
Right.
They're the result of years of debate.
Yeah.
And political maneuvering.
So this executive order is just one piece
It is.
of a much larger puzzle.
Exactly. And to really understand it, you need to look at the historical context.
Okay.
The political forces at play.
Right.
And the broader societal trends that are shaping our world.
It's like we're trying to read the tea leaves here.
Kind of, but it's not about predicting the future.
Right.
It's about understanding the present.
Okay.
And identifying potential paths forward.
So we're not fortune tellers.
Right.
We're more like analysts.
Exactly.
Trying to make sense of a complex situation.
Precisely. And part of that analysis involves considering different perspectives.
Yeah, we've talked about the Fox News angle.
We have.
But what are some other viewpoints on this?
Well, there's a strong counter-argument to the smaller government is always better idea.
Okay.
Many people believe that a robust public sector is essential for a fair and just society.
Okay.
They argue that the government has a responsibility to provide those essential services, protect vulnerable populations, and regulate industries to ensure the common good.
So it's not just about individual freedom and limited government.
It's not.
It's also about collective responsibility and social justice.
Exactly. And it's important to consider both sides of this debate.
Right. This brings us back to that key question.
Yeah.
How will this downsizing effort actually impact the delivery of government services and the lives of everyday Americans?
That's the question with no easy answers.
Yeah.
The impact will likely vary depending on a lot of factors.
Like what?
The specific agency, the region of the country, the individual circumstances.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation?
Not at all. Some areas might see little to no impact, while others could experience major disruptions.
Give me an example.
Well, as we discussed, it could lead to longer wait times for things like passports or visas.
Right.
It could also mean fewer resources for things like environmental protection, scientific research, public education.
So the impact could be felt across many different aspects of our lives.
It could. And it's important to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And engage in conversations about what kind of future we want.
You've mentioned the importance of staying informed.
Yes.
And engaged a few times now.
I have.
What can our listener do to actually make that happen?
Well, one of the most important things is to stay up to date on the news.
Okay.
But not just from one source.
Right.
Read articles from a variety of outlets to get a balanced perspective.
So don't just stay in your echo chamber.
Exactly. Challenge yourself to consider different viewpoints.
Okay.
It's the best way to really understand complex issues. Don't just passively consume information.
Okay.
Get involved.
Yeah.
Contact your elected officials.
Okay.
Attend town hall meetings. Join advocacy groups.
Right.
Volunteer in your community.
So this is about more than just reading articles and watching the news. It's about actively participating in the political process.
Exactly. Democracy requires participation.
Okay. You've given our listeners a lot to think about.
I have.
Any final thoughts?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we're living in a time of change.
Yeah.
And uncertainty.
For sure. But that also means opportunity, right?
Exactly. We have the chance to shape the future.
Yeah.
But it requires us to be informed, engaged, and willing to participate.
Well said. I think it's time for us to sign off.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
And to you, the listener, thank you for joining us on this journey.
We hope you learned something.
We encourage you to keep exploring this topic and have those thoughtful conversations about the future.
It's important.
See you next time.